Boldwood presents Daughter of the Stones, written by Alexandra Walsh, and read by Emma Gregory. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, and out of the third comes the fourth. The One. The axiom of Maria, in alchemical literature. Prologue. Darkness. Overwhelming darkness. The wind howled, tormenting her, snatching her words as she cried out, shouting for her father. Each word was a knife in her chest as she struggled to breathe, to force air into her lungs, but all she could do was gasp in desperation. "Please, no," she whispered, her hands floundering as she called again into the raging chaos of the storm-tossed night. "Help me! Somebody!" Her knees buckled beneath her, and she panted, the breath refusing to enter her body, her chest tight as her heart pounded, and tears ran down her cheeks. "Not like this," she said, her voice harsh. "Not alone." The ground was sodden, cold, and she floundered in its muddy embrace as she fell. "No," she murmured. Then a soft hand began stroking her face, wiping away the tears and rain. "Breathe," the woman said. "Breathe." "How?" she replied. "You are the one," the woman said, fading into nothingness. "Breathe." The final word was a whisper on the cold gust of driving rain, before the shadows at the edges of her consciousness claimed her, and she knew no more. Chapter 1. Golden Witch, Present Day. Caitlin King was early for the meeting with her father. She glanced at her watch as she opened the door of her cherry-red SUV. In the distance was the relentless tapping of the junior dance class, the tinny sound drifting through the open window of the small theatre. Shuddering at the noise, Caitlin reached into the back seat and took the circlet of wild flowers from its protective cardboard box. This was the reason she had arrived with so much time to spare, and she was angry her father had not remembered. She shook her long dark hair from her eyes and breathed in the beauty of the golden summer evening. The sun-dappled graveyard would be the balm of peace she craved after her busy day at work in the Hill Fort Cafe. Her car pinged as she locked it, and in her mind she heard her fiancé Stan's voice. "You don't need to lock the car. Golden Witch has the lowest crime rate of any area in the UK. His comment, while statistically true, was nevertheless naive, and Caitlin pushed these imaginary admonishments aside. She had grown up in the village. Stan Beach had arrived 3 years earlier. As the vicar, Stan was at the centre of the community, but he continued to see Golden Witch as a picture-book-perfect fairy tale idyll, rather than a real place. Although, as she crossed the car park that was shared by the small theatre and the village church, she could understand why Stan was enamoured by the surroundings. Golden Witch was beautiful. It nestled on the side of a gentle gradient, overlooking the Golden Valley and onwards to the Black Mountains and Offers Dyke, the demarcation line between the English and Welsh borders. On the edge of the village was a tumbled stone circle, which local folklore claimed was connected with the nearby Neolithic chambered tomb called Arthur's Stone. An archaeological dig in the 1980s had found traces of roundhouses and an Iron Age settlement, including graves with a variety of burial goods. During her teens, Caitlin had spent hours in the local libraries searching for more information about the ancient landmarks. There were very few facts, Instead, the history was a series of surmises and educated guesses, the gaps filled by myth and legend, which, in her heart, she believed were true. At the heart of Golden Witch was a large triangular green where cricket was played during the summer. Around this were shops, cafes, and the one remaining pub, the Three Sisters. Roads radiated outwards, a few leading towards the new housing estate on the far side of the village, another to rows of cottages and the infant and junior school, and another to the tangle of older streets with their mismatched but picturesque cottages and houses of varying eras. The final road meandered up a gentle slope to the church and the small theatre, which doubled as a church hall. Caitlin walked towards the lich gate, admiring the new handmade terracotta tiles on its roof as they glowed amber in the softening rays of the day. They were a contrast to the wood of the porch, which was black with age and weathering, the posts twisted but sturdy, guarding against evil. Wound around the top of the gate was a garland of flowers from a wedding a few days earlier. Fragrant sprigs of honeysuckle nestled into creamy roses and carnations, all surrounded by an abundance of foliage. Caitlin noticed oak leaves, rosemary, myrtle and maple, each flower and leaf chosen to symbolize love, fertility and prosperity by her friend Martha Orpwood, who was the third generation of women in her family to run the local florist. "Good work," Caitlin murmured as she let herself through the gate. "I bet Stan hasn't a clue you've put a pagan protection spell on his church." She loved her fiancé, but his refusal to embrace the village's more unusual traditions grated on her. For her, the quirks of Golden Witch, the place she had been born and raised, were part of her soul. When Martha had arrived with the garland the day before the wedding, Stan and Caitlin had been in the vicarage, and upon seeing it, he had hurried outside and queried its suitability. "Won't it be damaged when people open the gate?" he had asked. "No," Martha had replied, her florist's wire and pliers in her hand. "It's a village tradition, and everyone knows not to touch the flowers." "They're beautiful," said Caitlin, who had followed Stan, "and the bride requested them especially." Stan had slipped his arm around her waist. "Who am I to stand in the way of tradition?" he had said, but his smile had not quite reached his eyes. Caitlin breathed in the heady scent of the freshly cut grass as she followed the path through the graveyard. She took the fork, leading away from the 12th century church, towards a tranquil corner where a bench rested under the welcome shade of a linden tree. Graves of contrasting styles and ages stood sentinel around the quiet space, but Caitlin had eyes for only one. A green slate monolith, its colour striking but natural, and the mark of a local stone. It was almost 1 metre high, and it sat alone under the tree. At its base was an engraved plaque in the same colour slate, with words picked out in gold. Miranda King, 31st of October, 1964, to the 21st of June, 2023. Beloved wife of Larry and mother of Gillian, Rachel and Caitlin. Love comforteth like sunshine after rain. 2 circlets of flowers, one made of blush pink roses and honeysuckle, the other white gerbera and carnations, lay in a line down the centre of the grave, joined by purple ribbons. Caitlin's eyes filled with tears as she stared at them before adding her own wildflower ring at the bottom, tying it to the flowers above, with the ribbons woven through the design. She knelt on the grass, enjoying the cool, soft dampness of the earth on her skin, gazing at the flowers. Was this a sign of forgiveness? It had been 2 years since their mother had died. Were they ready to move forward? "Hello, Mum," said Caitlin. "Have you had a good day? It looks as though you've been busy."
You have flowers from both Bean and Rabbit, as well as from me. Has Dad visited?"
She bent forward to clear a few weeds from the grave, breathing in the familiar scents of the graveyard, the summer stocks, lavender, and the sweet scent of the linden tree.
"It's your favourite time of year, Mum," she said. "The summer solstice, the longest day and shortest night. What was it you used to say? A turning point in the year. The earth begins to tilt away from the sun as it travels back to the darkness of winter. If you were here, Mum, we'd all be wearing the wreaths of flowers in our hair as we danced around the bonfire with you and Auntie Suki."
Her voice cracked, and Caitlin flicked away the tears welling in the corner of her eyes.
"The cafe was manic today, and your brownie recipe is as popular as ever," she continued, forcing brightness into her words. "There's a meeting of the players tomorrow. Dad's thoroughly overexcited. He's announcing the new Christmas play. But he asked to meet me here this evening to help make the theatre ready, and probably to discuss refreshments for tomorrow."
There was a rustle above her, and a rook landed in the linden tree. It stared down at her with bright, black, intelligent eyes. Caitlin watched as it ruffled its feathers before opening its beak, pale, curved, majestic, wicked, and cawing.
"Hello,"
said Caitlin, and the rook cried again in response. They stared at each other, and Caitlin felt as though the bird could see inside her, reading her troubled thoughts, encouraging her to share them. Before she could stop herself, she blurted out, "Why is Stan annoying me, Mum? I love him, but in the past few weeks, he's been different, challenging me on stupid things, arguing for the sake of it." She glanced around, ensuring she was alone, as she continued, "He's away for a few days, but rather than missing him, I'm overwhelmed by the sheer joy of having the bed to myself. When I realised it was the solstice and your day while he was gone, I knew I'd be able to have a fire and celebrate like we used to, all without Stan tutting in the background. He doesn't really understand that side of me." She gave a sad laugh. "Don't worry, though," she finished. "We'll work it out before the wedding." The church clock struck 7, and Caitlin stood up, brushing a fallen leaf from the soft folds of her summer dress. "I'd better go, Mum." She placed her hand on the monolith again and breathed in, as though trying to capture a hint of her mother's perfume. But all she could smell was the grass. "Love you," she whispered, before walking back along the path. In the light and shade of the summer evening, with its dazzling show of shifting shadows of bright and dark, she did not see the man at the fork in the path until she was upon him. "Lee!" she exclaimed. He smiled down at her before she leaned into his hug. "What are you doing here?" Lee Glossop and his elder brother Edward had grown up with Caitlin and her 2 elder sisters, Gillian and Rachel. He was the son of Dr. George Glossop, her father's best friend since boyhood, while their mums, Miranda and Suki, had become good friends through their husbands. Lee had followed his father's footsteps and was a doctor too, recently joining George as a GP at the Golden Witch Surgery. Lee opened the lich gate for her. "A summons from Mum and Dad," he said. "Dad in particular. He insisted I help. Apparently he and your dad will be too busy backstage tomorrow to do anything as mundane as arrange the chairs." "They're both as bad as each other at the beginning of a show," she said. "Thank goodness your mum can usually bring them back to reality." "How was your mum?" he asked as they ambled across the car park. "She was fine," said Caitlin. "It's hard to believe it's 2 years since she died." "You must miss her," he said. "Yes, but it was a relief for her. She was in such pain by the end." Summer solstice isn't the same without our mums lighting a bonfire and telling us lurid tales of pagan rites," he said.
"And the tales becoming more outrageous as they worked their way down a bottle of wine," said Caitlin.
"Do you have any plans for later?"
"When we've finished setting out the chairs, Martha's coming over. We're going to recreate the ritual of the bonfire," she said. "Although I'm using my fire pit rather than a huge out-of-control stack of wood, leaves and newspapers like our parents used to build."
"What will Stan say?" said Lee. "He doesn't approve of your pagan ways."
"He won't know. He's away at a conference," she replied. "Fancy joining us?"
"Are you sure?" he asked, and she nodded. "Then I'd love to come, although I'm on call, so I might have to dash away." His phone pinged, and he pulled a face, making Caitlin laugh. She walked back towards her car where there was a cool box with snacks for the helpers. But as she took her car keys from her pocket and turned back to Lee, she halted. He was hurrying towards her, his phone clamped to his ear, his face ashen.
"What?"
she mouthed, but he shook his head, reaching out to take her arm. "She's here, Dad," Lee said into his phone. "Could you call Gillian Rachel? I'll take her there now."
"What's happened?"
said Caitlin as Lee hung up. "It's your dad," said Lee. "He collapsed while he and my dad were rehearsing for tomorrow. Dad says it could be a stroke, but we don't know yet." Caitlin stared at him in horror.
"Which hospital?"
she asked, wrenching herself away from him. "I'll drive," said Lee, removing the keys from her hand. "Come on." As he hurried her into his car, Caitlin heard a harsh caw and turned to see the rook from earlier. It landed briefly on the roof of the lich gate before flying away into the burning summer sky. Chapter 2. Golden Valley, Daubeny, 862 BCE. Cordelia danced. The rhythmic thud of the drums kept pace with her heartbeat as she spun through the shadows. Firelight filled the gloaming, its brilliance challenging the fading beauty of the clear summer sky. All around her were shouts of triumph and shrieks of delight as the straw figure at the centre of the flames buckled, collapsing inwards, its limbs flailing as it surrendered to its inevitable fate. A cacophony of exultation swept through the hill fort and, caught in the moment, she added her voice to the screams as the sacrifice succumbed. It was the festival of Litha, the summer solstice, and the straw man was a central part of the celebrations. Its destruction in fire presented a warning to the dark twin of winter, the opposing force of the light twin of summer. The ritual was to acknowledge the approaching darkness and to warn the winter it was not yet time for its icy grip to envelop the land. There were days of sunshine and abundance still to come. At sunrise the following day, Cordelia would take her place with the other high priestesses to enact the rites of summer, with the symbolic crowning of the sun god and goddess, to ensure the harmony of their settlement. With a flourish, the drummer brought the music to an end, and there were cheers and clapping from dancers and watchers alike. Cordelia hugged her friend and fellow priestess Becuma, who had danced beside her, before hurrying to the raised dais where her family awaited. "My child, you danced as well as your mother, and I can give you no higher praise," said her father, Lear Bladudsunu, the king of Britain, and the respected leader of their tribe, as he hugged her.
"Thank you, Fa," she said. "You know this is my favourite time of year. I love these celebrations because they're based in joy and laughter."
There were 8 festivals, each marking the passing of time and carrying their own rituals for the fruitful continuation of their tribe. "Come, my sweet," said her father. "Take a seat beside your sisters. Tonight you aren't a high priestess. You're my youngest daughter, a princess of our people." They hugged again, squeezing each other, an unspoken show of the fierceness of their love and respect for each other. When her father released her, they smiled, eyes full of love, before Cordelia sat in the space made for her by her middle sister, Regan.
"Don't listen to him,"
Regan said, pulling a grotesque face as she poured mead into Cordelia's goblet.
"You dance like a goose." "At least I stay upright. You always trip over your big feet,"
she replied as they giggled. "Grow up," whispered Goneril, the eldest of the three. "We're supposed to be on our best behaviour for Far's guests." Goneril angled her head towards a number of well-dressed men of varying ages, seated on the other side of their father. Most of the older men were members of their community, advisors and friends to Lear, but the remainder were visitors. They ranged in age from barely entering manhood to the mature features of Agonippus, king of Gallia. Beside him sat men of 20 winters or more, similar to the age of the sisters, all from nearby tribes. Maglorus, heir to the tribe of Albany, Henwinus, heir to the tribe of Dumnonny, and Ebraucus, the eldest son of a tribal leader from Brigantis. Each of the assembled guests were suitors hoping to wed one of the great man's daughters. Regan and Cordelia exchanged a mischievous look and leaned over to tickle Goneril until she laughed. One of the older men, Locrinus, their father's friend and the tribe's chief healer, glanced over and winked. He was like a brother to Lear and an adopted uncle to the three sisters. Seated either side of him were his sons, Lagon and Ivor, both of whom were conversing with the guests. Lear, ever alert to the smooth running of the festivities, followed Locrinus's look to ensure there were no disturbances. Cordelia saw her father turn towards them and, without thinking, she blew him a kiss. He pretended to catch it and placed his hand on his heart, then returned her kiss with one of his own. It was a game they had played since childhood, and it always made Cordelia realize how lucky she was to have such a wise and honourable father. Goneril scowled as Regan and Cordelia laughed at the action.
"Stop being so grumpy, Goneril," said Regan. "It's Litha, a time for joy." "She's right. If we can't share laughter on this night, during the solstice celebrations, then things would be amiss," said Cordelia. "Are you jealous? Did you want Far to blow you a kiss?" Regan teased Goneril. "Shall I blow you one instead? Or would you prefer it if it came from Maglorus?"
A smile twitched at Goneril's lips, and she flicked a tiny honey cake from the platter in front of her at her sisters.
"Who's childish now?"
Cordelia said as she caught the cake and ate it in one bite. Goneril shot a look towards Henwinus, Maglorus, Agonippus, and Ebraucus.
"We are in the presence of our future husbands. Don't let them think we're a bunch of savages," she muttered.
The summer solstice was considered an auspicious time for the arrangement of marriages, and despite Goneril's declaration upon seeing the potential husbands,
"They are lowly specimens, far below what I expect from a spouse."
She had been flirting with Maglorus ever since. Cordelia and Regan had shared amused grins as they watched the fair-haired and bearded young man trail around behind Goneril whenever he was allowed. "We are the daughters of Lear Bladudsunu," Goneril continued, "the granddaughters of Bladud-Hudibrasunu, the founder of the great town of Caer Badum in Atrabatis. Everyone knows the tale of how his leprosy was cured by its healing springs. When he was well and whole again, he dedicated the waters to the goddess Sulis."
"Quite right,"
Regan added in the same lofty tone her sister had adopted.
"And don't forget, our father is revered for creating peace among the tribes, all the way from Atrabatis through Belgae and the Cornovi to here, our home of Dobunny. It was a feat of strategy, diplomacy, and unflinching warcraft, and has given us this home overlooking our beautiful Golden Valley," Cordelia concluded, her voice low and serious. "Shut up, you two,"
Goneril replied, but she was working hard to suppress her laughter.
"Tonight is important. Father is choosing mine and Regan's husbands, and we want to ensure they're strong and powerful." "And rich," said Cordelia. "Why would you care?" Regan said. "You're a shamanic high priestess. You'll be able to stay at home forever."
Regan's voice cracked, and Cordelia hugged her. Marriage might mean a rise in status for women, but it would also entail leaving the hill fort where they had grown up, probably never to return. Cordelia thanked the goddesses every day for the talents she had inherited from their mother, Estrildis Logria Dotor, which meant she would remain here for life. It was a comforting thought, as she had no desire to travel to the far reaches of the land with a stranger. "The feast!" her father shouted, bringing her attention back to the celebrations, his excitement bubbling through his words. "Let us thank the gods and goddesses for this marvelous bounty." Cordelia touched her forehead, the position of her psychic third eye, and watched as, all around, others followed her lead. It was the sign they made for gratitude, and was always shared at their festivals. As the food was carried to the gathering, Lear stood. "Let us praise the goddesses for their fruitful bounty," he declared, as a roast pig was deposited on a wooden bench beside the seated guests, followed by an array of large platters overflowing with food. As he rose, Cordelia and her sisters followed. She suppressed a giggle as Regan shook back her long white blonde hair, ignoring the glance from Henwinus, the man beside the dazzled Magloris, who could not take his eyes from her. Regan was the beauty of the trio, the smallest in stature, her hair thick and wavy, shimmering with light, despite the hidden shadows in its curls. Her eyes were green, and her skin of a rich creaminess, decorated with a sprinkling of golden freckles. Goneril was taller, her hair chestnut red with eyes of amber, her complexion pale with hints of pink, while Cordelia, as the youngest, was different again, tall and slender, her dark hair held the depth of velvet night, her face as pale as the moon, and eyes as blue as the summer sky. The trio were the inspiration for many bards' poems. "My daughters will guide you," Lear boomed to his guests. "There may be dishes here with which you are unfamiliar." He beamed with pride as he ushered the three young women forward.
"Here, let me help,"
said Cordelia as Aganippus, the king of Gallia, reached towards the dish of fresh salmon. She served him using an iron-bladed knife, cutting through the pink flesh, and placing it in a bowl decorated with a bright red hematite glaze and swirls of amber.
"The boiled samphire and blanda bread will complement the fish, as will the nettle puree. Are these dishes familiar?"
"The salmon is, and the samphire, but I have never tasted blanda bread,"
he said, and Cordelia liked the way his eyes sparkled when he smiled. His accent was unfamiliar but attractive, and ever since his arrival, whenever he had spoken, Cordelia knew she had heard his voice before. She wondered whether they had met in the everyone, the spiritual plane she roamed as the tribe's shaman. She knew the answer would present itself at the most auspicious time, and when it did, she would understand.
"It's very good," she said, "especially when served dripping in butter, as it is this evening."
"Thank you,"
he said, and returned to his seat. Cordelia watched him as he sampled the bread, smiling as he looked at her, and pretended to swoon at its deliciousness.
"You're a priestess," she reminded herself. "You were born to serve your people, not flirt with potential suitors."
Yet, for the first time, she felt a small pang of disappointment, and as this unexpected feeling washed over her, she heard the distant caw of a rook. A shiver ran down her spine, and she turned to look at the small copse of hazel trees nearby. A rook was watching her from a high branch, its black eyes narrowed, its white beak shimmering in the first rays of moonlight. As their eyes locked, the rook bowed its head before taking flight into the summer evening. Cordelia watched as it disappeared into the shadows and whispered a blessing. A rook accompanied her when she undertook her shamanic journeys. It was her spirit guide, and offered her safe flight home from the everyone should her journey become too dangerous or disturbing. She was used to the corporeal birds acknowledging her too. By the time the food was finished, diamond-bright stars hung in the clear sky. Even without the glowing embers of the dying fire, the air was warm, and groups of people milled around, chatting, laughing, enjoying the festivities. The musicians played gentle tunes, their drums, pipes, and harps blending together in a magical conjunction. Cordelia sat between Agonippus and Ebraucus, listening with interest to the different methods of worshipping the solstice in the provinces of Gallia and Brigantis, the homes of the two men. Both were similar, but she winced when Ebraucus boasted of sacrificing a young deer.
"Is it not a waste?"
asked Cordelia.
"If left to mature, these animals could bring greater prosperity to the tribe with their offspring."
"It's a sign we believe the gods will provide,"
said Ebraucus, his words slurred from a surfeit of mead, spittle on his chin which he did not wipe away.
"The gods are pleased by our humility. They provide us with excellent hunting."
Cordelia did not believe in sacrificing any living creature. Her worship was goddess-led, and they had never once craved fresh blood, preferring a symbolic offering, like the straw man.
"The Brigantis tribe decided to make do with deer after their elders banned human sacrifice,"
said Agonippus, who was watching Ebraucus in disgust.
"They practiced human sacrifice,"
said Cordelia, horrified.
"Until a few years ago,"
replied Agonippus.
"Do you not do the same here?"
said Ebraucus.
"No, we're not savages,"
said Cordelia, revolted by the idea.
"The Druids and other wise leaders have long since made it known these practices are frowned upon."
Before she could continue, her father came striding towards them.
"Come, my daughters,"
he said, taking her by the hand and beckoning Goneril and Regan.
"It is time for you to dance."
Goneril opened her mouth, about to protest. Then she saw Lagon and Ivor walking towards them holding 3 batons made from bronze, the ends wrapped in rags which were soaked in vegetable oil from the previous year's press.
"The fire dance!"
she exclaimed.
"Ah, it would please me to see my daughters dance together one more time,"
Lear beamed.
"I believe change is in the air, and this might be the last time I am afforded the joy of having my trio, my triskeal of daughters, by my side."
He glanced over at Magloris before winking at Goneril, who blushed.
"Come, Goneril," said Regan, taking her sister's hand. "Let us indulge our loving father."
Cordelia stood between her sisters, a sudden wave of sadness washing over her. Would this be their last dance? She wondered. They had always been together, but the stark realization she might never see them again once they were married engulfed her, and she felt their bond of love tighten. They might bicker and tease each other, but they were the best of friends, as well as sisters. She looked at Regan, who was plaiting her hair to keep it from her face. Regan was an elegant dancer, and Cordelia knew her sister saw this performance as another chance to impress Henwinus. He was an orphan, but had been raised by his uncle and would inherit his vast tracts of land in Dumnoni. Cordelia waited for a flash of insight as to whether Regan and Henwinus would be married, but nothing materialized. Decisions are yet to be made, she thought. Something else must happen first. Perhaps it was the dance, a chance for Henwinus to fall in love with Regan as she swirled in the firelight. Lagan handed Cordelia her baton.
"Be careful," he said. "The rags are smouldering. As soon as they receive a rush of air, they'll burst into flames."
"Thank you,"
she said, smiling up at him. Lagan was a constant presence in her life, a best friend, perhaps a brother to replace the one she and her sisters had lost so many years earlier. although her feelings towards Lagon were not always sisterly. As they had grown, she had often experienced sparks of attraction towards him. Ivor, older than Lagon by 2 winters, handed the remaining 2 poles to Goneril and Regan. "Dance with care, my beautiful princesses," he said, and bowed low from the waist as he backed away from them.
"Fool!"
laughed Goneril, but Cordelia noticed the flush on her sister's cheek. Ivor, too, was handsome, but in a different way to Lagon. The men were half-brothers, sharing the same father, but being born from Lacrinus's 2 marriages. Ivor favoured his late mother's sandy-coloured hair and brown eyes, while Lagon followed their shared father's look with dark hair and blue eyes. The 3 sisters took their positions in a line. Around them the inhabitants of the hill fort gathered, the air heavy with expectation. The fire dance was one for which they were famed, and as such they practiced the routine at least twice a week. Cordelia always took the lead, and when both her sisters had whispered, "Ready," she nodded towards the band, giving them the cue to begin. Music filled the air, ancient in its beauty, the harp and the drum weaving the tale of the goddesses of old when they walked in the land of Albion. The 3 sisters, their feet slow at first, quickly found their way into the well-worn groove of their storytelling. As each twirled their baton, the soaked rags burst into flame, causing a wave of noise and excitement from the onlookers. The intensity of the tune increased, the steps becoming more complex, but still the sisters' feet were deft and skillful as they spun and weaved, their hair flying in the summer night, the moon bathing them with silver. Out of the corner of her eye, Cordelia saw Becuma dart forward and throw a handful of tiny wax discs into the flames. She knew what would happen next. It was a trick they used when wishing to impress during their rituals. There was an exclamation as the flames flashed blue, then green, before returning to their normal hue. But as they did, Cordelia felt the earth shift.
"No!" she gasped. "Not here! Cordelia, what's wrong?"
Regan's voice was urgent. Cordelia's knees buckled, causing her to stumble, but she managed to regain her balance. Her eyes closed as lights swirled in an arc. The vision was vivid. All around her was devastation, destruction and despair, pouring rain and shouts of anguish. A man, her father, his face streaked with blood, his teeth bared and one eye covered in a bloodied patch, stood over a lifeless body, his sword raised, his mouth open in a silent scream. "No!" she gasped, but the vision had passed, and she was back in the present. Regan and Goneril danced around her, their batons twirling, affording her a chance to recover. She nodded to her concerned sisters, indicating she was able to continue, and threw her flaming stick in the air, catching it deftly as her sisters followed suit. They slipped easily back into their dance, with few noticing the unexpected changes. The song reached a crescendo, and the 3 women tossed their sticks to each other in a blur of speed and expertise, crisscrossing in and out, the flames creating the burning image of the Triskele, the symbol of the triple goddess. A roar of wonder raised from the crowd as the music reached its dramatic climax, and the 3 daughters of Lear finished in a triangle, their backs to each other, their right hands raised as the flames on their batons flared against the night sky. Above them, 3 rooks circled, their caws filling the night sky, and Cordelia collapsed in a dead faint at her sister's feet. Chapter 3. Golden Valley, Dobunni, 862 BCE.
"My daughter is our shaman."
Her father's voice was faint as he explained her fall to their guests, but there was a note of pride.
"She has the clear sight, inherited, not learned."
Becuma and Angharad helped lift her, but Cordelia gasped as though in pain.
"What's wrong with her?"
said Regan, her voice tense, worried.
"Be careful. She might still be in the Everyone."
"No,"
reassured Cordelia, her voice hoarse.
"The rook returned me home
I am here.
She felt Regan's hand squeezing hers. "Take her to our roundhouse," ordered Goneril. "We'll care for her." The four women guided Cordelia away from the gathering. As she passed her father, he smiled reassuringly, but she could not look at him, speak to him. The image of his otherworldly violence was scorched on her mind. His conversation with Agonippus floated to her through the night sky.
"I had no idea she possessed the gift,"
said Agonippus, his voice full of concern.
"Will she recover?" "Of course," Lear said. "This must have been a powerful message for it to have taken her by surprise."
"Please send her my regards,"
said Agonippus. Cordelia felt a strange pang of loneliness as she heard his footsteps retreating. "Come," said Becuma. "You must rest, and tomorrow we will decide what your journey shows us."
Yes,
whispered Cordelia. She allowed herself to be led to her quarters, unable to believe what she had seen. The violence, the brutality. The pale body on the ground. In her trance, she had seen her father raise his sword and bring it down with swift, brutal blows. She had felt the icy slice of metal, the cold fingers of death, before she was flying, lifted by the rook, leaving behind the horror of her vision. Goneril lit the oil lamp, guiding Cordelia to the bed, helping her to take off her shoes. Regan, Becuma, and Angharad moved around the room on silent feet, sprinkling herbs and tinctures across the entrances and around the bed.
"These will keep you safe,"
said Angharad. She was the mother of the temple, the most senior woman of rank in the hill fort, and revered for her wisdom.
thank you,
murmured Cordelia, her eyes heavy.
"She must sleep,"
said Angharad to Goneril, Regan, and Becuma.
"I'll stay with her."
The tone of her voice was firm. The other women knew not to challenge her, and with whispered good nights they left.
"What did you see?"
asked Angharad as soon as they were alone.
Far,
said Cordelia, her voice faint, dreamlike, as though the trance lingered in her blood.
He was injured.
"Badly?"
No, he was angry, full of violence. There was a battle, she said.
Angharad closed her eyes.
"I see nothing,"
she said.
"Tomorrow, after the ceremony for Litha, the crowning of the god and goddess, you must travel back there."
No,
gasped Cordelia.
Please don't make me.
"You must visit it again before it travels too far from you. If there is to be an attack, we must be forewarned. We might be able to heal whatever has caused this rift in the everyone and prevent the bloodshed from happening."
It can't be done.
"Yes, it can," replied Angharad. "Your mother achieved it on several occasions, and you are more powerful than her."
Mother averted wars.
"She went deep into the everyone and changed our destiny. It's how we became so prosperous," said Angharad. "She guided your father and helped him to achieve his status of king. It's why he's so proud you inherited the gift. He feels he has another advisor, one who will steer him through troubled times."
The image of her father, his teeth bared in rage, made Cordelia shudder.
"Sleep now,"
advised Angharad.
"Tomorrow we will know."
Angharad turned away, busying herself with the guttering oil lamp. And as she did, Cordelia felt a streak of pain down her arm. When she raised it in the dim light, she saw a silver line on her skin, like a thin scar that had healed, even though it had not been there before her vision. She stared at it, wondering if the trance lingered, and this was a dream. But when she touched it, she knew it was real. The candlelight flickered, casting grotesque shadows on the walls as Cordelia adjusted her ceremonial headdress. The 2 antlers, taken from the body of a young deer who had succumbed to the bite of an adder, made her silhouette monstrous. Becuma, wearing the flowing white robes of the priestesses, dipped a soft brush of rabbit fur into the blue woad, and with a well-practiced hand painted the swirls and patterns of the dreaming spells across Cordelia's face, finishing with a triskele in the centre of her forehead, the position of the psychic third eye. Behind her waited the 3 handmaidens of the temple, twin sisters Gloisin and Ignosin, and Udar the neophyte, the youngest member of the sisterhood. Gloisin stepped forward and took the bowl and brush from Becuma before retreating to the shadows.
"The girdle,"
said Angharad. She stood behind Cordelia, wearing robes dyed brilliant blue and embroidered with leaves of green, red, orange, brown and white, falling in a graduation of colour from her shoulders to her feet, embodying the changing seasons and the turning of the year. Ignosin presented a heavily embroidered fabric belt, which Angharad tied around Cordelia's waist, fastening the silken cords with an intricate series of knots.
"The jewel."
Udar stepped forward and held a cushion aloft. On it nestled a pendant of deepest purple, attached to a woven cord that matched the girdle. Angharad reached around Cordelia's neck and fastened the necklace with a small but perfect clasp of a gleaming copper hook and eye. Then she and Becuma stepped away. Behind her, the other women echoed their movements.
"May the goddess hear your words,"
Angharad said, bowing low. "Your wishes have been heard," replied Cordelia, inclining her head. "The wax tablets have been prepared as you requested," Becuma said. "We shall keep vigil until you return." "Thank you, my friend," murmured Cordelia to Becuma. The women straightened, their eyes averted from Cordelia as though she were too bright to allow them to look directly at her, the embodiment of the sun. They filed out in silence. Upon the altar, a fire burned in a shallow metal cauldron. Beside it, in a basket of white willow, were 5 small, round wax tablets, nestled among bunches of herbs. Next to this stood a golden flask engraved with images of bees and a matching goblet. They glinted in the firelight, giving the impression the bees were moving. "Matrone, Mother Goddess, I invoke thee for protection," Cordelia said, as she poured wine from the flask into her goblet, before adding a libation to the flames. "Hecate, Sister Moon, I invoke thee for my safe return. Ain, Sister of the Sun, I invoke thee to shine a light on my path as I heal our past and future." The fire spluttered as the tiny drops evaporated. She dropped 2 of the small round wax tablets into the flames. As they melted, the sweet scent of the honey from the beeswax floated on the air, before, with a hiss, the flames flared purple. "Corycia, Cleodora, Melena, the bee maidens 3. Show me the path to the truth," she continued, crumbling herbs into her drink. "Help me to repair our wounds and return our strength and compassion. Show me the path as I follow your wisdom." Cordelia swallowed the wine in one gulp and winced as the bitterness of the herbs hit the back of her throat. Breathing deeply, she waited until a woozy feeling began to creep over her. The hallucinogenic properties of the henbane were stealing through her blood. As it took her hold, she groaned. The world around her blurred, her eyes widening and rolling uncontrollably. She sank to her knees, her arms outstretched as she flew into the everyone, where a wolf howled, and on her shoulder she felt the claws of her spirit guide, her rook. Her connection to the mortal plane was kept safe by the rhythmic drumming and the low chanting of invocations to the goddesses by her sister priestesses. In the distance, another rook cawed, and she flew into the blinding white of the everyone until the image formed around her, and she was standing in the centre of the hill fort.
"No,"
she said as she gazed at the horrifying vision.
"This cannot be."
The once prosperous and welcoming community was in tatters. The straw roofs of the roundhouses sagged with neglect. One had been half burned, and the entire structure abandoned. People she did not recognize scurried about their business, their heads bowed, faces white and pinched with hunger and cold. Skinny dogs worried mangy chickens, and the central meeting space, which was usually filled with energy and laughter, even on the coldest of winter days, was desolate and bare. In the distance, the temple was in ruins, and a goat wandered through the entrance to what had once been the inner sanctum. A woman stumbled past her. Tripping on one of the ruts, she fell to her knees, and the covering on her head slipped into the mud. Cordelia gasped. It was her sister, Regan, but her hair had been shorn almost to her scalp, and her skin was blotchy and scarred. From the nearest roundhouse, another woman hurried to her aid, and Cordelia felt her stomach clench. Goneril was gaunt, her face angular from lack of food. One eye was swollen shut, and there were bruises around her neck. Cordelia could see the finger marks on her sister's skin from where an assailant must have throttled her, but had released her before she choked to death.
"Where are my useless daughters?"
The voice was low, angry, full of menace, and the two women clung to each other in fear. A man, his left eye covered in a leather patch, emerged from the roundhouse. He was stooped and skinny, leaning on a heavy walking stick, his lips bared in fury.
"How many more beatings must I give you before you two useless wretches prove yourself worthy of calling yourself my daughters?"
he shouted.
"Sorry, Fa,"
whispered Goneril, helping Regan to her feet.
"You dare to answer me back?"
he said, and Cordelia ran forward to try to halt the violence, but her father brought his stick down on Goneril's arm. She screamed in pain, and the two women crumpled once more into the cold, icy slush of mud and dung on the ground. The rook cawed, and the scene changed. Cordelia stared around in alarm. This place was like nowhere she had ever seen before in her dream-walking. She was standing in a long, narrow room. It glowed with an unearthly, harsh white light, and there were doors at points along the walls. There was no trace of the roundhouses or the settlement, but as she looked around, a path of golden light opened before her, and Cordelia knew she was safe. The glowing footprints on the floor buzzed like the sacred bees from the temple's hive, and even in her trance state, she understood this sound indicated she was being shown a message of life-changing importance. One of the doors shone silver before swinging open. She stepped forward, following the lights, but the room she entered confused her. The space was the size of a small roundhouse, but the walls were straight. It was square, with no softening curves. A bed dominated the center of the room, where an old man lay asleep. She did not understand the vision. This man was attached by what she could only think of as cords, clear and flexible, to strange black boxes, which flashed and beeped. A woman sat beside the bed, holding the man's hand, and she was crying. Cordelia watched as the woman wiped away her tears and reached forward to stroke the man's face. When she spoke, her accent was strange, her words both familiar and unusual.
a language similar to her own tongue, but with different inflections and intonations. "Dad," the woman said in a quiet voice, "I love you. Please don't leave me. You're strong. Uncle George says you can make a full recovery. Please, Dad, fight to stay with me." Cordelia moved forward, drawn to the sorrow of the woman's heart. She wanted to offer comfort by standing nearby. During these visions, she knew she could move through any obstacle, doors, walls, none held any substance for her, and she could pass freely through them like a spirit. But when she moved towards the bed, expecting to skim through its solidity, she felt the coldness of metal and the smoothness of the sheets as she bumped into the bed, making it tremble. The woman looked up. "Who are you?" she said in horror. For a fleeting second, their eyes met, and Cordelia gasped. Then the rook cawed, and all went black. Chapter 4. The Tale of the Three Sisters. There were once 3 women, the Queen, the Baroness, and the Princess. They were sisters, bound by blood, and, although they did not know it, an ancient prophecy from the mists of time. They travelled far and wide, stating they were the emissaries of their husbands, who were busy waging war for reasons no one, least of all the men, understood. Each path the women travelled, every problem they solved, their fame grew, and they became a respected trio, loved and adored by the good, honest, and pure of heart, but reviled and feared by the sly, evil, and conniving of character. Wherever they journeyed, they righted wrongs and calmed quarrels, ended feuds, and reunited families. The bards told tales of the adventures of the Queen, the Baroness, and the Princess. One evening, tired from a day on the road, the women followed a path lined with pure white stones, hoping for the hospitality of a good fellow at its end. The road wound around a hill, a gentle slope leading through dark woodlands, past fallow farmland, and into a deserted town, where the gates of a magnificent castle were opened wide. As the 3 women rode into the gleaming quadrangle at the heart of this ancient stronghold, silver trumpets pealed through the silent air, announcing their arrival. Livery-clad servants and grooms scurried forward, taking charge of the horses and beckoning the women through the great golden doors into the sumptuous hall within. Courtiers, lords and ladies, nobles and ladies in waiting, smiled in welcome. The senior Lord Chamberlain swept them to comfortable state rooms, where legions of servants were on hand to help them bathe, relax, and dress in the exquisitely crafted silken gowns that awaited. The armourer arrived and asked permission of the Queen, the Baroness, and the Princess to repair and polish their armour. The blacksmith requested their approval to sharpen their weapons and fire them additional superior swords, to tend their horses' hooves and saddles. The Lord Chamberlain invited them to stay for as long as they desired. The Queen, the Baroness, and the Princess had been on the weary road of adventure for a long time, and this was the most hospitable and generous welcome they had ever received. "My good people, the honour is ours," said the Queen, allowing the servants to carry away their armour and swords. "This is a remarkable place," added the Baroness with a grateful smile. "Such kindness is exemplary." "A welcome that is unprecedented," said the Princess, who alone was concerned that with the removal of their armour and weapons they were vulnerable. As a form of protection, she held back a slender dagger and secreted it in her boot. "My good people," said the Queen as the servants prepared to leave, It is remiss of us not to have asked sooner, but please would you share the name of your lord and master to enable my sisters and I to thank him personally?" But as she asked the question, the servants vanished. Chapter 5. Golden Witch, Present Day.
"Caitlin, wake up!"
Lee's voice was urgent. She could feel him crouched beside her, but her body was heavy. She was unable to move. Everything around her felt uncertain, as though the edges were blurred. His fingers felt for her pulse. "What's wrong with her?" said Gillian. Her voice sounded distant, far away, but underneath the harshness, Caitlin detected hints of concern. "Is she breathing? Check her bag for her inhalers." Rachel's voice reached her through the lifting fog. There was a rustle as her sisters pulled the handbag from beside Caitlin's chair and rummaged through it, ignoring any thoughts of privacy in the way only a sibling would.
"Her pulse is steady," said Lee.
"I'm fine,"
Caitlin murmured, but her voice was weak and it was a struggle to open her eyes.
"Should we call a doctor?"
said Pete, Rachel's husband.
"I am a doctor," replied Lee.
He squeezed her hand, and she felt the heaviness lift, opening her eyes to see her sisters staring at her.
"What happened?"
snapped Gillian. Her face was ashen, her eyes angry and fearful.
"I don't know,"
Caitlin replied.
"Was it your asthma?"
said Lee, taking an inhaler from Rachel and passing it to Caitlin.
"No,"
she said, trying to remember.
"I was talking to Dad. Then the woman came in, the one in fancy dress. There was the forest and the castle."
Even to her own ears, she sounded demented, and, with an effort, forced herself to breathe deeply, to focus.
"I must have fallen asleep,"
she said, looking up at the ring of faces. For an instant, the distress on the faces of her two elder sisters felt like a comforting balm. Then their masks of dislike slipped back into place.
"Trust you to make it about yourself, Moon,"
snapped Rachel, shoving Caitlin's handbag, which she had been hugging like a lifebelt, back into Caitlin's arms.
"About—"
Caitlin swallowed the end of the sentence, clenching her fists. She glanced at Lee, who raised his eyebrows as though telling her not to bother responding to such a ridiculous statement. She took a long, calming breath.
"I'm sorry,"
she murmured, but Dr. George Glossop, Lee's father, stepped forward and hugged her.
"No apology needed,"
he said, forcing an end to the conversation before it could escalate into an argument.
"We're relieved you're all right. We shouldn't have left you alone. We should have gone to feed the meters in the car park in shifts, not at the same time."
"Except we needed a break from this oppressive room," Caitlin heard Rachel mutter, and she understood her sister's comment. The room was depressing and claustrophobic. When the sisters had arrived at the hospital 4 hours earlier, George had told them in no uncertain terms their father's health was the most pressing concern.
"He needs peace and quiet," George had stated. "Whatever feud is going on between the three of you is to be left at the hospital door. As godfather to all of you, I insist you behave like the sensible, caring, loving women I know you are inside."
Gillian, Rachel, and Caitlin had glared at each other, but were chagrined into silence. Gillian was with her husband, Alan Albany, and a few moments later, Pete Cornish, Rachel's husband, had arrived grumbling about the cost of parking. Lee had driven Caitlin to the hospital, and on the way she had rung Stan, but his phone had gone straight to voicemail, and she had heard nothing since.
"How serious is Dad's condition?"
Caitlin had asked as they hurried along the corridor, its pale walls lit by harsh white lights, to her father's room.
"Luckily, we were together checking the final details for the announcement of the play before we set out for the theatre," George had said. "It's very hard seeing your friend collapse. But that's why a doctor's training is rigorous. All other emotions leave you and you focus on the event. As I was with him, his medical care began instantly, and it's helped a great deal. The consultant believes your dad has had a transient ischemic attack, or TIA. It's also known as a mini-stroke, and is caused by a temporary disruption in the blood supply to part of the brain."
"Will he survive?" Gillian had asked.
Yes, these are usually quite minor, although they're often a warning, an indication that a more serious health issue, such as a full-blown stroke, might be imminent if the situation isn't monitored. He's been talking lucidly, and the consultant is confident he'll make a full recovery, George had said. However, he was very tired and fell asleep a few minutes ago, so let's try not to disturb him.
When they had entered her father's private room, tears had welled in Caitlin's eyes. He had looked so small and fragile in the hospital bed. Caitlin could hardly believe this was her dynamic father. She always thought of him as larger than life. He was the owner of a huge factory complex inherited from his father and grandfather, and he relished the day-to-day challenges of running his business empire. He was never still, always exclaiming with joy and delight over his newest favourite hobby, of which there were many, but his true passion was amateur dramatics. It was common to find him reciting lines or rehearsing sword fights in his office in the middle of the day, or scribbling possible dialogue during meetings. On one memorable occasion, he had asked his board members to read a new scene he had written for the evening's rehearsal, as he wanted to judge whether it worked or not. To see him brought to this, frail, white-faced old man, hooked up to banks of machines, was heartbreaking.
It's late, George continued, bringing Caitlin back to the present, and we shouldn't have left you alone.
Don't even suggest I should go home, Caitlin interrupted before he could say any more.
Nor me,
said Rachel and Gillian together. There was a tense silence, broken by the arrival of a nurse, who smiled at them vaguely before checking Larry's monitors and doing his observations.
How is he?
Asked George. He's fine, said the nurse, replacing his chart on the bedside table. Fast asleep. Perhaps you should all go home and do the same. Have a good night's rest. There's nothing you can do here, and you're more likely to disturb him. We'll call you if anything changes. The nurse left, but no one moved.
What do you think, Lee?
Asked George, as the silence grew. Lee walked to the end of the bed and picked up the blue folder containing the notes. He flicked through them, pausing to check a few details, then passed them to his father. George read the sections Lee pointed to, then returned the file to his son. The two men were GPs in the village, but this was a relatively new position for Lee. He had taken over the role 6 months earlier, after years of working his way up to the